Hello, hello, hello. It is Stephanie here. Welcome to episode 100 of the Rent to Rent Success podcast. This is a very special episode. We have with us Kazeem Alli-Balogun, and he is a rock star in property by Kazy. If you are not following Kazeem on Instagram, what are you doing with your life? Kazeem likes buying houses, in his own words, making them amazing and selling them for a profit. He's been in property for 8 years, but he's done so much. And he's done everything from HMO conversions, rent to rent, ground up, loft space, office to resi, flat conversions, luxury homes, auction flips. And his mission is to make property development and financial literacy accessible to everyone. And I know that you're really going to love the conversation today. I can't wait. So, welcome to the podcast, Kazeem Alli-Balogun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on today.
It's great to have you here. You're better known on Instagram as Property by Kazy, if people want to find you there. And I just put your Insta handle up on the screen. But what I'd love to know, Kazy, is what's your backstory? Tell us about how you grew up and how you first got into property.
So I normally start the story with, I went to university, sort of dropped out because it wasn't the right time, ended up going back and got into my first business was in shisha. So firstly, like mobile pop-up stores, then working with festivals, which, for those who didn't know at the time, that was sort of 2012, I think, around that sort of time. Like the margins and the markups were massive. So made some decent money from there. But just the late hours and the longevity of it wasn't really my passion. So pivoted into property and did my first deal, which was an auction flip. My broker described it as a baptism of fire because the first ever lending that I used wasn't a buy-to-let, it wasn't a residential mortgage, it was a bridging loan as my first ever product, solely because I wasn't in a position, because of income, being self-employed, to be able to meet the sort of lending criteria. I didn't necessarily have bad credit, but didn't really have any credit, so to speak. So wasn't able to get, a conventional mortgage. But it was funny when we were talking sort of off camera and sort of just catching up in general, that my property journey actually probably started 3 or 4 years before that. And ironically, it was actually in rent to rent, although at that time, I'm pretty sure it wasn't called rent to rent, sort of 2009. It maybe was, but I think it was, it was just called subletting effectively. And there was, not too many people were aware of it, but I just sort of always been into business and had, somebody that I knew that owned property in the UK. They used to live in the UK and had moved overseas. And they'd been having loads of issues, and they used to get me to go and sort of check up and try and do rent collection for them. They didn't have a contact here and their agents weren't very good. They weren't getting paid consistently. And I sort of looked at what the agents were paying them, kind of looked at what the rooms were renting for, and just saw that there was a margin here. And so effectively my first introduction to property was rent to rent, not as a business, but in my personal name, with these overseas landlords who didn't basically have the facility to offer. So I was offering them a service, effectively offering them guaranteed rent. There wasn't a name for guaranteed rent, but guaranteed rent is a very good description of what you're doing. You're saying, look, I'll pay the rent and just let me deal with the problems. And that's sort of what I did. And yeah, I've still got some of those properties up till now, some of them making me, 4 figures a month, and they've made me that for the better part of 10 years now. So we're sort of talking hundreds of thousands from that initial business.
Wow. And they were already up and running. So I wasn't aware that you still had those ones on. And are you managing those yourself, Kazy?
So I have a personal assistant now, or a VA, who manages the majority of I have a small rent-to-rent portfolio that was in my personal name. And then I have my own property portfolio as well. So she manages all of the logistics of that. And it works, that's only something I've done recently. But it's like now, shout out Rebecca, now that I've got Rebecca, I wouldn't know how to go back. I don't understand how I had the time to manage that before. Like now, once you get systems in place and you have like a way of doing things and a level of automation, you know, having like a viewing assistant, using various different applications and sort of calendars and things like that to plan my diary. Going back to thinking like a year ago, I was still, you know, dealing with the repairs issues, dealing with the tenancy renewals. And to be honest with you, because of time constraints, I probably wasn't dealing with it that well and offering as good of a service to my tenants and to myself in terms of efficiencies that I could have. But the expense, you know, of having a VA on board now has changed my life. Like, I wouldn't know how to go back to living without it now.
So you said VA, virtual assistant, but I'm guessing this is somebody who goes in person to the properties, or no?
No. So I have a virtual assistant who deals with all of the inbound inquiries, all of the tenancy renewals, all of the maintenance. She manages my maintenance guys. So I would effectively give her like an approved contractor list, because for anybody that's looking to potentially maybe get a VA on board, like with anything, you get as much out of it as you put in. So if you give them, you know, these are my processes, these are the way I do my tenancy. So I use a system called Good Lord. I don't know if you're familiar with Good Lord, but it's basically a tenancy like management and property management software. But I got on, like, I think now it costs about £200 to £300 a month. But I was an early adopter who started using it when it was a one-off fee of £250 for life.
Whoa.
So yeah, that's another thing that I definitely like. If you see good tech and you think you can be like an early adopter or a brand partner or something, like, you know, if you believe in something, a lot of the time it's worth investing early on. It's like any investment. If you come in at the seed stage, you'll just see your investment grow exponentially. Like I've had that now for seven years, I think. They're now, I think they just took a new investment of like 100 million or some ridiculous amount like that. But effectively, yeah. So I've got, so I digress slightly. So effectively, she manages the stuff, everything she can do virtually. We then have a viewing assistant who she'll arrange viewing for, who either work on a per viewing or a commission basis for finding new tenants. But realistically, the properties run themselves now. I went from knowing the name and number of every single tenant, and now, like, if you ask me, a lot of the tenants, I could tell you sort of 10% of them, and they're way happier. You know, their response rate, if they have any issues, she's great. She gets great feedback from them. We did our annual review this morning, actually. She's just, you know, just agreed a pay rise because she's done so well. So yeah, I'm really happy and an advocate for using VAs where possible.
I love that story, because people come to me all the time and say, you know, I'm working full time, because a lot of people, they might not have their own business yet. They're working full time. Have I got time to do this? And I say, yeah, you will need to put more time in at the beginning, but at the beginning you've got fewer properties as well. So it's a commitment you can definitely do on the side of a full-time job. But then later on you can outsource it. And exactly as you've done, Kazy, we've had that same experience. I suppose all businesses go through that, where at the beginning I was managing tenants, going to viewings. I knew all of the tenants and all of the properties. I had the idea of the vibe of each house, and now all of that is outsourced to Luke. And when he goes on holiday and I go in, I have to pick up the system, because we've got software of how to do a check-in, check-out, how to do all the different processes, how to do a viewing, etc. And I wouldn't know what to do if it wasn't for those systems. But
it can be almost a little bit scary to hand over, like, you know, if you're quite anal and like to be in control and know what's going on. But I think if you get good people on board, then, and systems, I think is what, when you touch systems and standardization, like that was how, you know, people were able to run, you know, effectively, you know, corporations or, you know, like companies that were global before the internet, because of standardization. You did one thing in the same as you did in another country, and effectively sort of take that same principle to your business.
Yeah, I love that we've already gone there. If you're in Kickstarter, that's in module 6, all about the systems, but so important and gives you the freedom in your business. But let's go back to your story. So I love that you were so entrepreneurial. You saw this, you were helping out your friend. Now, some people would have just helped out their friend, carried on, gone about their business, but you just saw it and you just said, there's an opportunity here. You made the offer and they took you on. And then because you're offering something that no one else was offering at that time,
Yeah, it was new. It was and it was integrity as well, because effectively they were overseas. They didn't have control over their asset. They were coming back, every couple of years at best, before they were coming back to seeing their property in disrepair, a bad state, the agents charging them like, excessive amounts for repairs and not doing stuff for them. I just built my rent to rent portfolio realistically off the back of that one initial client who just said,
Yeah.
look, this person's look like, if you've got a property, this is who I use, this is what they've done for me. And I think, in any business, but particularly, in property, when for a lot of people, you're dealing with the biggest investment they've ever made. Like your integrity and the fact that they believe you have their best interests and you want to protect their asset as if it was your own art is one of the key factors in growing your business, because word of mouth is the best recommendation you can get.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, having that ethics, having that integrity. And this is where renters as individuals have an advantage often over letting agents, who many have been let down. Many landlords have been let down by letting agents on an HMO basis. But I want to come back to you. So you had these properties, you still got them 10 years on, some of them cash flowing over £1,000 a month. But I know you went from there. Tell us what happened next.
So, like I said, from there, I'll kind of skip the like I said, the shisha side and stuff. But that's how I effectively raised the capital, because we're doing events like, for those familiar with the festival circuit, like V Festival is probably my favorite. Sort of 3-day events, making £4,000 a day. We're sort of open almost 24/7. Labor costs were low as I got free tickets to the festival. Was having friends coming and saying, "Look, you work half the day, go to the rest of the day and just enjoy the show." So they were really fun, great times, but again, really long days, sort of late nights, and just wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. So first deal that I identified was a flip, something that I'd seen in auction. And that was effectively like my proof of concept. Like, wow, this, do you know what I mean? I bought the property, saw a way to add value, and that was effectively turning the kitchen, that was a large kitchen, into the second bedroom, and creating an open plan kitchen living room in the lounge. And that was a business model that, to be honest, I still use up until now. I'm doing one of them. I exchanged on it last week, and I've been doing that again, because a lot of the time in property, I think you don't really have to reinvent the wheel. You have to just become very good at what you do. Yeah. And that's effectively what I've done over the last 8 years, particularly in this current market. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but one of the most common questions I get asked is, it's a bull market, prices are going up. Like, how do I find a deal? I can't find a deal. I can't, do you know what I mean? Like, they're just asking me to pay too much. Like, where do you get your deals from? And it's like, look, there's no such thing as that place where you go and pick up deals. Because if the deal was obvious to everybody, supply and demand means competition would increase the price. There'd be a bidding war, and eventually all of the profit will be eroded out of the deal, because there'd no longer be a deal. A lot of the money comes in property from being able to see the potential that other people have missed, like from your past expertise. So whether that be converting a 1-bedroom flat to a 2-bedroom flat, or seeing that an office space could be converted into residential, or seeing that, you could do a loft space development because of reading the legal plan, the lease plans, or seeing a house could be converted into flats. But a lot of the potential comes from seeing that you can actually create money, can create an increased GDV in comparison to what your competitors are looking at, or your other potential bidders on the property are looking at, which means you may actually be paying more than they were willing to pay. But it's because you know that you can make that property worth way more than they could make it worth. So you effectively create your own deals through expertise and experience.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to ask you now. But let's start off with, most people, when they're starting out in property, they might not know how to create something from nothing, or how to add that extra value. What made you so certain with this first property? What gave you the courage to do this, to buy this? Tell me.
I would describe myself as an active learner, I think it's called, in academic circles. Growing up, like, I was still am dyslexic. So use tools like Grammarly that have really helped, like, with my written communication and stuff like that. But I wasn't really somebody who personally I'm not a course person. Like I learn by doing. So I had spent some time with like other developers, effectively just like kind of engaging with people that are doing what I want to do. And they weren't necessarily employing the same strategy, but they were doing flips and stuff that I wanted to do. So I understood sort of from a PM role, kind of did sort of some PMing for these guys as well to manage their projects, and built up a wealth of experience from doing that. There's also so much information, more so now than there was then, but so much, if you've got the time, like free information, you can work out what it is you want to do. And then really it's just a case of the same principles that I employed then are the same ones that I employed now when looking at flips, like work it backwards. And I didn't know that it was going to work, but for now, obviously I've like had my litmus test. I've done it, enough times. I know it does work. Work your deals backwards. So what that means is you start with what the property can sell for, and you get that amount from doing your own research, from speaking to local agents, looking at, the sold data on Rightmove, Zoopla to see what stuff was sold for, doing your comparables to the type of finish that you're going to hope to do. And then that gives you your GDV or your gross development value. You shouldn't try and make the GDV fit what you're going to buy the property for. You have to work that out first, and then take away your costs, then take away your cost of finance, take away your associated costs like your stamp duty, your legal fees, your surveys, your searches, professional fees, anything else that you're going to pay for, and then take away your sales costs as well. So that's your end legal fees and your agency costs. Take all of that away, and then work out how much money you'd like to make from the deal, whether that's 25%, 30%, or a fixed amount that you want to make. And that would then give you what you can pay for the property. So if you do that, and you can be comfortable that you've got those numbers right, effectively you can be comfortable that if you can secure that property at that price, that you should be able to make the deal work. That being said, you should always have a buffer, because in property, a lot of the time we're dealing with 100+ year old properties that the walls could be being held up by wallpaper. There could be all different things behind that you can't see, behind the walls, under the floors, in the loft. So it's always good to have a contingency budget. But I think as a starting point for appraising a deal and working out if something's viable, they're the steps that I've always taken.
Yeah, love that. And I love that you're an active learner. You recognize that in yourself. You went straight in. We were talking earlier that you did this on bridging finance. So it's, as your broker said, a baptism of fire. But before we move on to rent, I really would love to know the numbers on this first deal, just to give people a flavor of what you
do you know what's funny? Because I've done like different interviews and different podcasts. Every time I sort of estimate the numbers on this deal, because it was so long ago. So I'm going to give them. But if I'm wrong, I don't want somebody in the comments saying, on this one, you said it was, but I'll find it one day when I put stuff out, I'll do some sort of day, and I'll actually do some deal analysis days where I go back and I find my completion statements. I get the exact numbers. But I want to say I purchased it for 210,000, around that, low 200s. Spent approximately 25,000-30,000 refurbishing the property. And I've also got this weird metric, and I don't know if it works for other people, but people say, how do you cost a deal? Like, what do you use? Do you use standard per square footage? And I'm like, that stuff is good, but they can have so many variables. I always like, when I'm trying to just appraise a deal from a starting point, if I'm doing a refurb, so not extensions or loft conversions, generally speaking, I'll say, look, what I'm hoping to sell this property for. Okay, give or take, I'd give myself a refurb budget of 10% of that amount. It's not always bang on, but when you're trying to appraise 30 deals in a day, and you're trying to go through all these different properties on Rightmove or Zoopla or what you've been sent for sources, it's a good sort of starting point to quickly just rule out stuff that's really unviable. So approximately, so we'd be at anywhere between 235,000. Stamp duty at that time was pretty negligible, probably maybe in about £2,000, pretty low at that time. Solicitor costs, and then cost of finance. ended up selling that property for £300,000.
Right, yeah.
Sold it, I think, from completion to completion, it was about 7.5 months. So decent return, sort of probably, I'd say conservatively about £40,000 profit, which would be a return on investment of probably about sort of 35 to 40%. But if you annualize that, it shoots right up because, you know, at that point in time, had a lot lower capital levels. So how efficiently you use your capital, we have to not just think about how much money you made, but also how long it took you to make that money.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important. When we're not hedge funds and we don't just have unlimited capital, there's always a case of, look, what was the trade-off? What did you lose out on doing because you did this deal? So you have to look at the efficiencies of our capital, which is why as developers, we focus on return on investments and return on capital as like a really high sort of metric for how we analyze how well we've done over a year.
Yeah, I love that as well, thinking about the opportunity costs and the time part of it, because that's why it makes sense not to do everything yourself. But I know that in most of the time you're talking about your flips, which look incredible. And I do encourage people to go over to your YouTube channel. Can you just give us the name of it? Is it Property by
So
Kazy?
it's exactly the same, Property by Kazy, all one word, no spaces. There's a decent amount of content on there now, I think about 30, 40 videos, but we've just shot loads of new videos that are all going to be coming out over the next month. I think I've got a hard drive full of like 20 new videos, sort of day in the life stuff, you know, sort of numbers on flips we've done recently, site visits, etc. So hopefully a lot of good content if you guys want to follow that.
Yeah, absolutely. So go and follow Kazy on Instagram. Also over there on YouTube, you'll be able to see a lot more about flips. And what I want to get into here today is the rent to rent. You had those rent to rents in your own personal name where you saw that opportunity and you totally went for it. And then later on, you set up a rent to rent business. So tell us about that.
So yes, I was a co-founder of a rent to rent business. It set up 2015. I was in rent to rent for approximately 5 years. So exited in 2020. Rode the sort of the market, the rent to rent roller coaster, loads of different highs and lows. But had a good experience in rent to rent. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. Was effectively after I did my first flip, and let's say I've made, you know, 30, 40, 50,000 pounds. It's like, that's great. I've made this big chunk of money. But if I don't have another source of income, I'm going to keep eroding into my working capital and I'm not going to grow as a developer. So rent to rent was a way that I could basically create an income for myself, which meant my working capital, every time I did a flip, I was just growing. And that's how I was able to grow as a developer, with having a secondary income, or one, because it wasn't really secondary, to be honest with you. Time wise, it was probably taking just as much as my time to kind of grow the rent to rent brand as it was to run the property business. However, they were both as important because you need cash flow and you need capital in property, and those things together are a great combination. But without either of those two, things can come unstuck.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you had the idea, you're in this capital hungry business of development or flips at the time, and you decide to open this rent to rent business. So tell us about just getting started with that.
So that, I think rent to rent again is something that, because we have business partners, you know, we didn't put in much capital at the beginning. We sort of tried to grow it as organically as possible, which meant starting quite slowly. I think, you know, our first property, you know, it was definitely a case of all hands on deck. I've still got pictures of me coming back from IKEA with all the bags of the dress items and the hemming strips where you have to cut the curtains to sew them to make them the right length and hanging the curtains. And it was definitely a case of, I wasn't trying to be a CEO overnight. I understood that I needed to be an employee of the business first, to be as efficient as possible, because effectively, you know, I could have gone and got a handyman and could have just, you know, done the delivery, but these are all costs. And effectively at the beginning, you're trying to, you know, obviously use your money as efficiently as possible. So we took on our first property. And again, like in any business, when you first, you know, you take on that property, you start to have you start to obviously recoup your initial overheads and see that, okay, this is working, and just sort of started to set some goals of taking on new properties, strategies for taking on properties. I think looking back, I think the best decisions that we made in terms of where we invested money early on was investing in our tenancy agreement and our contract with the landlord. So our company let agreement or corporate let, however you want to phrase it, because effectively that agreement is what protects you from what you've invested over the term of your business. So if you have secured this amazing deal, getting you £1,000 a month for 5 years, that contract is what protects that money for you, and you're making sure that it's compliant and fit for purpose for the way in which you want to run your business. I think is really important. So that's definitely some advice that I would give to anybody that is wanting to get started in rent to rent, to make sure that you do, get that document right to start with.
Did you ever were there any disputes where you needed to fall on your contract?
Yeah, no, there was a couple of disputes with particular, like two cases that I can pinpoint in particular, where there was an agent involved. Not to say that it's not good to use agents, but effectively, a third party almost becomes like Chinese whispers of he said, she said, and having a good contract that actually backs up exactly what we said, and what we were going to do, because we covered an element of the repairs in the property. But that contract, we had an appendix that clearly outlined the repairs that we do and don't cover, and the extent of the repairs and what we are and aren't liable for, and the landlord's requirements of their timeframes of when they would step in to do repairs. And that meant effectively that we didn't have to negotiate every issue with the landlords. We could just refer back to the contract, which meant that we could run the business a lot smoother, and we could also offer a better standard of service to our tenants as well.
That is such incredible advice. And the thing that I find, Kazy, that I was shocked by is when I first came into the property world, I just assumed that solicitors know shit, and that they actually going to know a lot more than me about contracts. Maybe they do know a lot more than me about contracts, but they'll say they know about rent to rent, and obviously they understand it as a concept. But what they don't understand is the way that things can go wrong and what clauses they need to choose from their boilerplate template to put into the contract. And so over the years, we've added in a lot of clauses, and now
I'm sure your agreements have changed and developed as just from experience.
Totally. And so now we've got coronavirus contracts, we've got clauses rather, we've got the break clauses, we've got the what you were talking about the repairs, and when we pay for emergency repairs if the landlord isn't paying, and that we get paid back from the rent, etc. So
all of that stuff you have to have in writing. Like, you can't just assume that I can take the money out of the rent. That's just not how business works. You can't say, because we paid for it, we're just going to take it out of the rent because we deal with your money. People, I think there's an element of sort of what people just think, this is fair, and because if it's fair, I can do it. But fair isn't how business works. It works on what you've agreed and what the contract states.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have those contracts available because we just saw so many people actually going to solicitors, having contracts made up that don't include half of what needs to be included, because the solicitors don't know, and as a new person, you don't know. So you can check that out. It's renttorentsuccess.com/contracts blog. We've got all the info about contracts.
What you just said about the solicitors as well is they may know their day job in and out, but they don't know your business. And particularly if you've got some bespoke clause or the way you're going to interact with the landlord, you need to explain that to the solicitor in as much detail as possible, so they can then, because you basically write your contract, they make your contract legal effectively. And that's really it. You have to put the effort in. You can't just expect somebody else to understand and set up your business for you. The same way when you're setting up your website, you can get a great web designer and a web developer, but you have to do your content or give them a great framework to create the content to make it make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. you're right, and over the years we've added to it as we've learned, but now it's really tight. So great advice there about the contracts. But going on to rent, obviously you've grown the business over. You were saying that when you exited, am I right here that it had a turnover over £1 million or
last year? The last 2019 was a £1 million turnover year, and yeah, I've seen, like I said, I'll be very transparent with my rent to rent journey. Had some great times, some not so great times. And look, it's a business that there is a lot of money to be made. It's also a business that, because of the lower barriers to entry, there's a lot of competition. There is ways that you can make it very hands off, but I would say initially, from my experience, that there's a lot of legislation, there's a lot of requirements, there's a lot of moving parts that, there is a lot to get grips around, particularly if you don't come from a property background or a lettings background, which I didn't. So there was a lot in terms of just compliance to understand. But again, like anything, it's risk and reward. When there's a lot of reward, there's more risk or more work involved. Not than other areas of property, but just as a vocation in general. And yeah, in terms of my journey, and again, I'd really like to hear, because that's one of the reasons I wanted to come on from somebody like an expert like yourself who speaks about it on a daily basis, what your opinion is, because mine could be isolated specifically to me, and I could have been very lucky in some instances, lucky and unlucky in others. But I found my experience was effectively this, that, from it, because I was used to doing rent to rent. I had 5 properties, at that point in time for myself. They were great. They were making me like £4,000 a month. Happy days. That's if the average UK salary is 25,000, I was earning 50% above the average from a side hustle, which was great. Obviously, as a company, when you want to do it more formally, you've got higher overheads. So not loads, but we had, the websites and different things and, different branding stuff and different market employers and stuff that we wanted to use to grow at a faster rate than I did as an individual, as a side, as a side hustle effectively, which weren't too bad at the beginning. And, we grew the business and maybe took on 4 or 5 properties and we're making a decent amount of income, albeit split between three founding partners. But I think I found this thing in rent to rent where it's like, you go like this, and then you get to a point where it was no longer manageable for me as an individual and as a business, depending on where you want to go, because the initial goal for us was like a co-living brand. So because of that, there was a lot of schemes and stuff that we wanted to implement beyond just a normal rent to rent brand. So we then took on like, an admin, an office, like, effectively like a property manager, viewing assistants, and then also like we were looking at sales. And you got to the point where we're making all this money, but then we had all these expenses. So our expenses shot up and then our profits dropped back down to the point where you then had to get back up. So there was this trajectory, like if you want to run it as a big business. And then the other thing that I sort of realized was that it is effectively, for somebody who wants to get into rent to rent, there's an element of it, of really, I tell people a lot of the time that you need to understand what you want out of rent to rent. Like where do your numbers lie? Like, and what do you have to start with? Because you've got, say, £15,000 to start with, and you want to be making X amount a month. And you say, for example, your startup costs will, just for argument's sake, because it'll make easy maths for me, £5,000 a property. You can take on 3 properties day one. If they're each making you £800, it means you're making £2,400 a month, which means just after the 2-month period, technically you could take on another property. And then just after another 2 months, you could take on another one from the cash flow you've got from the business. But what that also means is then maybe for the first year or 18 months, you're not taking any remuneration from yourself as the business because it's all being reinvested. And at what point you stop reinvesting and start taking income, there's a trade-off between growth and remuneration. And I think it's really important for people that want to get into rent to rent to actually do the numbers on that and make sure that their investment strategy matches their income requirements, particularly if you don't have a secondary source of income. So you understand where you're going to be, because I think I didn't necessarily do that at the beginning. which I think I was always playing the trade-off between right, I need income to right, I want to grow the business, and sort of being pulled between the two.
Right. Okay. Those are really great points. So let's go to the first one. So you talked about the profitability goes up and up and up, and then once you get to a certain point, you take on staff, and the profitability goes down. The revenue goes up, the profitability goes down. So what was the point for you? How many properties went, or how many
I
rooms?
think it was probably about 20 properties. That's about 100 tenants, because we're averaging 5-bed HMOs.
Wow, that's actually a lot beyond what I thought you were going to say.
It
But
was
I suppose
because we had 3 of us though, so there was a balance of, I think, as an individual, but because we were a team, it was less. Definitely 100%. If 10 properties is a serious amount of work for an individual, particularly if you don't have the systems.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is, where I think it's phenomenal is where you've got, as you said at the beginning, because you've got all this cash flow coming in. It's just you. Maybe you've got a VA as well. And when you've got 5 properties, that's really great. I think our first 5 properties, they cash flowed. It was over £3,000, 3,500 and something per month over a year. It was, I can't remember the exact numbers now, but I do know, because I've got it in my presentation. Over 5 years, it was over £200,000 on those first 5. And you've got very low costs of managing them, very low in terms of time commitment, even if you do it yourself. So that's a great place to be. And for many people, I say that's a phenomenal place to be. If you want to carry on your work, you can use that money to help you invest, or you can use that money to live off if you've got other income coming
No,
elsewhere.
exactly. And I think for so many people, that's why I was saying understanding where you want to get to, because, in hindsight, obviously the business was great, but in hindsight, maybe 7 or 8 properties with a VA would be perfect, and would have meant that I could have actually focused on my property development journey earlier and been further along the line with something else I wanted to do. It doesn't have to be property. It could be cooking, it could be anything, but it gives you that time and that flexibility to do that. And that's the only reason I was like, I think understanding what you want to get out of anything you do is really important.
Yeah, because exactly what you said, as you grow your business, you grow your costs as well, and the profitability can vary. But for so many people that I see, 5 or 6 properties, even fewer than that, can give them the income they need and the profitability that they need to be successful. But going beyond that does require something different.
And don't get me wrong, some people, I've seen some examples, like people that have really set up these great co-living brands, and because they're a brand, they get the brand benefit of their rooms are smashing ceiling prices. They're getting, rather than the £700-800 per property, they're making £1,500 a property. They've got the systems in place, and they've shot up to where they're making, literally some people are making hundreds of thousands of pounds a month from the big, rent to rent providers. But it's just a case of that's no longer a side or something else. That's a real business that requires probably, most of your focus.
They went through that as well. So they would have been, started off profitable.
Yeah, it's just
more expenses.
It can go all the way back up.
And then, because we had Richard Brown on the podcast, who recently bought one of those big co-living companies, I think 2 million, if I remember rightly, turnover in London. So yeah, absolutely. And we are streamlining in some respects. We've got about the same as what you were talking about, just over 100 tenants, 20 properties. And we're being very choosy now about which ones we're taking on, because we obviously analyze each property and each relationship also, and decide on the ones that are serving best. Because the thing about this business is, it's so much harder for an HMO landlord to find a decent letting agent who can provide the service to a consistent high quality than it is for us to find a property. But what I want to say to you, Kazy, is people worry about, how will I find properties? What about when I'm just starting out? Who will give me a property, etc.? How did you find that process of actually finding people who would want to give you property?
I think I'm going to kind of merge this in with another, I guess another point, which is in terms of like, I left rent to rent because, you know, it wasn't my focus at the time. And also because of some difficulties because of COVID and, just around shared accommodation, because that's where I was at. But at the same time, people ask about the market, and I'm still saying, look, if you go back to basic business studies like SWOT analysis, when there's threats to the market, there's also great opportunities. And it's really understanding your landlord and the person that you're dealing with, because any sales is a people business. And although everybody's very different, I always found that you could almost categorize landlords into sort of three key categories. So the ones that are really financially driven, in terms of, this is a typical investment for me. How are you going to best protect my investment? What are my returns going to be? Why am I going to make more money with you? Like, when I look at the product holistically for how you're going to look after the property, the type of tenants that I'm going to get, the consistency, the hands-off element, and really benchmarking your services versus what else they could get, and understanding, and basically being able to, understanding your pitch of why your proposal for any given landlord is the most financially viable for them. There's then your second landlord, who's more of, they generally fall into the accidental landlord category. It's their property is their main investment. They maybe used to live there. It didn't start out as an investment. Effectively, that property is their baby. It's their, they have a real attachment to that property in that condition. So with them, your pitch is still the same. You're not changing your pitch, but you're just explaining to them a different element of your business. So why is what you do, why are the processes that you've evolved and that you undertake when looking after a property, why are they going to best look after that property for that landlord? Like the quality of the tenants, how you vet your tenants, how you manage the property, how you make sure that you do your property visits, the way in which your cleaners are maybe your eyes and ears in a property to deal with any issues that arise. What are your maintenance procedures like? Who are your local contractors? But basically explains that landlord why your property is in safe hands with you as opposed to somebody else. And then you've got the third landlord, which is a mixture of the two, basically, that wants a bit of both. But I think effectively it goes full circle. What are your processes and how are you going to look after their property? And then how can you then explain the value of those services to your client, which is the landlord?
I love the way you broke that down, because I could obviously recognize all of those landlords, the ones who are very financially oriented and really want to stack it up that way, the ones who are more on the accidental side, who see their property as their baby, they want to know that you're looking after it, and that.
And then the ones that want a bit of both, but they want to be sold on both elements. You can't just focus on one or the other.
Absolutely. But the key thing there is really to listen to what the wants are, to ask questions, to draw out that, and to really listen to what people say. Kazy, I feel like I've got so much to talk to you still, and we've only just barely scratched the surface.
I know.
But I'm just going to ask you really for advice. I love the way that you've broken things down, the various topics that we have touched on. So I'd love to know, a lot of people will be listening here and thinking about getting started in property. They'll hear about, obviously, we've talked about some of the challenges. But what advice would you give to people who are thinking about getting started?
I think basically, if you want to get started in property or in anything, you first need to understand what you have at your disposal to execute any given element of property. There's lots of different ways you could get into property. And I think to start with, work out, do an honest appraisal of what you have at your disposal. So how much time do you have? What level of capital do you have? What contacts do you have? What expertise do you have in any given area? And then also look into, take that and do your own research and really sort of just dive into property head first and go, and there is a wealth of free information online just to start with, to get an idea of different areas of property and work out where you maybe have a passion or what areas that you like, and also then match what it takes to get into those areas of what you currently have at your disposal. And then what, because I said, like, we live in a great age now where through Instagram, Clubhouse, Facebook, TikTok, there's so many different ways to learn. But that being said, there's a lot of information that's free out there. However, I think you get to a point where you then have questions. And with the free information, a lot of the time it's not as engaging and you can't ask those questions directly. So once you realize where you want to focus and what you don't know, that's then a good point in time to maybe look at, a property educator or some sort of course that's going to further your knowledge or your expertise to enable you to take the next step. But I definitely think you have to marry education with action. You can't just do action with no education, and you can't just have education with no action. So try and find a happy balance between the two and just use your skill set and what you have at your disposal to be able to execute a strategy. And you will be going back and forth between learning, between doing, between learning, between doing, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I think it's just about staying proactive. Some of the best, people that are most successful in business put a lot of their success down to luck. But it's not just the fact that they're lucky, it's the fact that they're constantly doing things. They're putting themselves in a position to be able to receive and benefit from that luck.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You just talk. I just love the way that you talk, the insights that you give, the clarity with which you speak. And that is a perfect way to end, really, that you should mix the education and the action and really move forward towards your vision. But when you're looking towards your vision, it can seem so far away. But you are fully set up and equipped to take the very next step in front of you, which is how we all get to where we want to be. So I want to thank you, Kazy, for joining us today and giving us an insight into your world. I want to remind you, if you're watching and listening, do check out Kazy, Property by Kazy on Instagram, and also a really fantastic YouTube channel, Property by Kazy. And we're just about to drop loads of Kazy's just about to drop loads of videos.
Tsunami of videos coming soon, so make sure you subscribe.
Subscribe to the tsunami. And of course, I will be back here again next week with another great guest. Thanks for joining us for episode 100. And of course, if you want to know more about the basics of rent to rent, if this is all new to you, then you can go to renttoRentSuccess.com/guide, GUIDE, and we will send you the free rent to rent guide and 90-minute free training masterclass. So until next week, have a great week. And remember, believe bigger, be bolder, be a game changer. See you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.